How's everyone doing? It's a very good presentation from Matt. And like Michael Beckley was saying, I can relate to his story about being at Appian for, you said how many years? 17 years. I've been in BPM for 16 years. And I ask myself all the time, did I expect to be here this long? No, I was hoping by now I'd be on a golf course somewhere in Hawaii playing golf all day. But I'm with you. So Matt talked a little bit about low code and what that means. And what I want to do is share with you where Forrester sees this low code market going and what the opportunities are around low code. So to get started, I want to ask a question. How many of you believe that your business will be disrupted by digital technologies in the next 2 years? Okay. I'm looking way back. I think that's about maybe 40% of people. We asked this question of business executives, and we asked them 12 months. Instead of saying 2 years, we said, do you expect that your business will be disrupted in the next 12 months by new digital technologies? 53% said they expect their business to be massively disrupted by digital technologies in the next 12 months, right? And so we know digital, as Matt was showing with Baxter, represents a huge opportunity. But we also know it creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty. And so it reminds me of something that happened to me recently. I was on my way to Chicago earlier this week, and I was on a plane that had one of these TVs, right? That sounds weird, but it had a TV, right? Most planes have, you can watch TV, live TV. And if you remember these storms that were rolling through the Midwest, I don't know if you guys caught that this week, the tornadoes that were rolling through the Midwest. And I'm sitting in my seat and thinking to myself, as they were showing these tornadoes, I'm 30,000 feet or whatever in the sky, headed to Chicago, and I see these crazy tornadoes. How many of you saw that? The tornadoes on the screen. How many of you have ever been on a flight where they were showing tornadoes on live TV close to where you were going, right? Think about that. And I was just thinking, does the pilot know that there's a tornado coming, right? And so it made me think, when I was going through that experience, it made me think about what's going on in our businesses today with this focus on digital, where when we talk to companies, they have this feeling, right? It's a great opportunity, but there's storm clouds brewing. And they're like me, very anxious about, okay, how are we going to deal with this? How do we start addressing this? And the real storm cloud around digital is actually this statistic from the Department of Labor that by 2020, there will be a shortage of 500,000 developers. Think about that, right? Great opportunity in digital, but it's also creating these storm clouds around skills issues, trying to get the right developers in place, because we're going through this transition when it comes to technology and digital. And so what's driving this? Well, if you take a trip to your local Barnes & Noble, you'll see what's driving this. And most of you are living this every day. The number of new development frameworks and languages that are coming out is unbelievable. So when we talk about developer shortage, the real issue is developers can't keep up with the pace of change, the new languages. Actually, this picture that I'm showing here, I took it a couple weeks ago when I went to Barnes & Noble, and I just wanted to count up the number of new languages that have been introduced. And I wanted to take a picture. While I was at Barnes & Noble, taking this picture and rearranging the books on this bookshelf, I think the people at Barnes & Noble were not happy with me that day. I could see the service person or one of their employees looking at me like, what are you doing? Why are you messing up the books? But when I was there was a young man there, about 25, 26 years old, and he was just browsing through the books, right, looking at different books. And I asked him, what language are you focused on? And he said to me, you know, my goal is to be a full stack developer, but the issue is I'd have to learn so many languages, I've given up. So I'm just gonna focus on one part of the stack, right? And what he also pointed out to me that was interesting as we were having this conversation, he pointed out the other problem I have is by the time I learn a language or a framework, it's gone, right? This is the other piece of this puzzle. When we look at this, these are just some of the frameworks. I guess they're going to show the slide. But these are some of the frameworks that are out there. How many of you are familiar or in your company work with at least one of these frameworks? I imagine most people should be raising their hands, right? But think about this. Teams have to learn all of these new languages. It's driving this issue around the storm clouds, right? And so, and just to give you an example, I mentor college and high school students, technology students that are doing startups. And one of the frameworks that we worked with is called Parse. I don't know if any of you have heard of Parse. Anybody heard of Parse here? Okay. It's a mobile backend framework. Built different mobile apps on this, working with different teams, these college teams. And just recently, Parse was acquired about 4 years ago by Facebook, right? But just recently, Facebook announced, we're going to discontinue Parse. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean for all these apps that have been built and people are using, right? And so that's one of the challenges here. It's not just, you know, you have this explosion in frameworks. It's this dimension around the frameworks themselves. What's the shelf life? Can you keep up with that? What we also see is this focus on what we call zero-day events. How many of you are familiar with the term zero-day event? Okay. This is one of my colleagues in application development in Forrester talks about this. And we're seeing where building apps is going from 12 to 18 months to 2 to 4 months. But now what we also see is this request from managers and executives, can you build the app today? We need this today. In the past, when a manager would come and say, hey, can you build this app? We need it today. The development team would laugh, ah, ha, 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 good joke. That's really funny, right? And then they both have a laugh, and the developer would say, we'll get it to you in a couple weeks, right? Today, the only person laughing is the developer, right? The management team is saying, no, we really need this today, right? Zero-day event. And so we see these two challenges driving this shortage and a need for a different way of thinking about development. Shortage of developers, but also this issue of needing to speed things up. On the other side of this, though, it's really interesting. My daughter, this is a picture of my daughter from, she went to one of these coding camps, coding competitions, right? And it was really fun to watch the kids learn using tools like Scratch and being able to do drag and drop. And they were able to build some pretty sophisticated apps. I was like, wow, I wish I could do this when I was your age, right? but really amazed to see how quickly they were able to use tools like Scratch. And even now, they have the kids learning Swift, which is an iOS programming language. And I think it was Matt or Mike were saying, you know, in some of these newer languages, you don't really worry about where do I put the semicolon. Right? We're starting to evolve, and I can see where it allows someone as young as my daughter to be able to build some very cool apps very quickly, right? And we also see this. This is a survey that was done by Stack Overflow, and they wanted to find out, you know, where are developers learning, right? When we look at this developer shortage, are people getting degrees from college and then moving on to become developers? What they found is the majority of developers are self-taught. And that's a good thing, right? So this is the other side of that developer shortage. There are developers out there, maybe not classically trained, and the question becomes, how do we tap into those developers? The interesting thing, going back to my daughter in her program at this boot camp, I was thinking they built some really cool apps. But what they didn't teach the kids, which I'm thankful they didn't, is polymorphism, class inheritance, right? They didn't learn the theoretical part of programming, nor should they have to, right? But we still, in some cases, need that level of rigor around our applications. So we can tap into these new faces, new talent coming into software development, but we also have to have some guardrails that help them be able to build apps without, as Matt was saying earlier, really shooting themselves in the foot and taking the organization with them, right? And so, how many of you here are implementing a BPM program? Just about a show of hands. How many people are here for BPM? I imagine most people are here for BPM, right? Into this problem, this 500,000 developer shortage, BPM has a huge opportunity, has a very big opportunity. And like I said before, I've had a front row seat to BPM for the last 16 years, but digital is creating this new opportunity. And we have a choice. Do we want our BPM programs to be a lump of coal in the organization? Or do we want to look at this opportunity to fill this shortage to turn BPM into a diamond, right? How many people want BPM to be a lump of coal? Somebody said, come on. That's a real question, right? How many people believe they can turn what they have invested in BPM into a diamond? Just by a show of hands. You don't believe it? Okay, thank you, right? But the question is not whether we want it to turn into a diamond. The real question is how. How do we move BPM into this direction? How do we change our practices? How do we update? How do we modernize or completely transform what we're doing around BPM, right? And so we have to start looking at what are the features and capabilities that are important to moving in this direction. And then we have to decide what are the features that we either need to get rid of or we need to improve, right? And so we asked this question in a recent survey for BPM teams, what's the most important capabilities for BPM to your organization? What are the most important features in BPM? First, no-brainer, process modeling, right? Second, though, and we see this steadily rising year over year, is rapid application development. 3-4 years ago, this same survey had rapid application development for BPM in 3rd or 4th place, right? We see it steadily moving as a key feature. Case management also becoming critical. But we also asked, what are the features of BPM that you see as most difficult to implement? And I'm curious, how many people feel the data side of BPM is the most difficult to implement? Doing data integration, just by a show of hands. Okay. How many people feel UI and forms is difficult? Okay. How about business rules? Show of hands. Okay. So when we asked this question, it mirrored the room, by the way, right? The first piece was data management and integration. And I love the survey because I've always said it's great when data validates you, right? Sounds crazy, but it's great when data validates what you've been saying for an extended period. And one of the things I've always found to be the dirty little secret of BPM is data. Data is the hardest thing in a BPM project. Most teams focus on data last, right? It's usually tends to be the least important thing. The other piece is forms UX. How do we design dynamic forms? And this is a very important piece when we talk about digital, right? Digital is about engagement. How do we engage employees? How do we also engage our customers? And so being able to create very dynamic forms is really important. Business rules, also a difficult piece. So we have to start looking at this, right? How do we make these pieces that are most difficult a part of that move? How do we focus on this more? And how do we get the technology to focus on it? And so what we see, if we go back to those slides, you saw rapid application up there twice, right? So rapid application being an important capability, but also a very difficult capability to implement. And so going back to 2014, around mid-2014, we started looking at this. the convergence of BPM with app dev. And when we did the research, we walked away saying, we believe that there's fire here. BPM is shifting from just being a focus on large-scale transformation to being more of a focus on how do we use the platform to do model-driven development and deliver apps quickly. And the term that we coined for this was low-code platforms when we started doing this research. So if we look at this, for the research, just to give you a little bit of background. So for the research, me and a colleague of mine, another analyst, John Reimer, we got in our virtual VW van and rode across the world. You can kind of see our faces in there, right? Kind of riding across the ocean, so to speak. But we went around and interviewed companies to understand how were they speeding up development? What tools were they using? And my question was really, how does BPM fit into this? I mean, BPM has a history or a track record of being complicated, taking very long to ramp up. You have to have very specialized skills. And so I'd heard teams saying, no, we're using BPM in a very different way, right? So when we started doing these interviews, I wanted to understand, is it really reducing the time? Right, because we've heard this story before, right? How many of you have been in BPM more than 5 years? Yeah, most people here, wow, okay. They got a lot of friends. So you've heard this story before, right? And so I wanted to hear definitive proof that these platforms were being used to reduce the time it takes to deliver solutions, to deliver applications, right? And so when we went around, like I said, we talked to 40 different companies across different industries, and we asked them some very basic questions. You know, why are you using a platform, a visual model-driven development platform? We asked them also, who's doing the development? And then we asked, how much time is it saving over hand coding? Like if you did this in Java or .NET, how much time would it have taken you? If you did it in this other platform, how much time did it take? And what we walked away with was a definition for low code based on these interviews. It's really interesting. I'll give you a little bit of a side story here. Because when we started doing this research, we didn't use the term, we hadn't coined the term or come up with the term low code development. What we actually had was something like software systems of engagement platforms, right? That doesn't sound too sexy, does it? System of engagement platforms. But when we did the research, we stepped back and said, what did we hear? The main thing we heard from people was, we use these platforms to reduce the amount of code needed to deliver applications, right? We don't want to have to write code all the time. So that was the first piece, right? So we heard that low code, but we also heard low barrier to entry, right? So we heard people say, look, we use these platforms because we hired a kid out of college. Remember the kid I was talking about earlier that was in the bookstore in Barnes & Noble? They're saying we hired this kid, very sharp kid, doesn't know everything about programming, doesn't understand polymorphism, doesn't understand class inheritance, but we were able to give them this tool and they were able to build applications pretty quickly, right? And so this low barrier to entry became a big part of the definition. And that's when we said it's really about low code. And low code meaning, not meaning no code. We didn't hear anybody say no code. What we heard was 85, 90% of the application we were able to configure through drag and drop. But then that last 10 to 15%, it required some code. We had to do some development. So that's why we focused on the low code. What's also different here from traditional BPM is the investment, the upfront investment. If you think about, if we go back, people that were here had their hand raised, I've been in BPM for 5 years. Usually to get started, you're looking at $300,000 to $1 million, right? What we saw here were teams saying, hey, I can get started in the cloud very quickly, and I can have a solution up and running and prove out my concept or my idea very rapidly at a fraction of that, right? And so the definition, this is our official definition for low-code platforms that enable rapid delivery of business applications with the minimum of hand coding, but this last piece is important, and minimal upfront investment in setup, training, and deployment. Okay? Just to give you snapshots of some of the conversations we had on this virtual bus tour that we did in interviewing companies on this. One organization we interviewed was in the US government, the Affordable Care Act, actually a custom company that's using Appian. They were using their low-code platform, the Appian platform, for document compliance. So being able to document where people are sending in information, make sure they're eligible for the program. What they were able to share with us is initially through code, they estimated it would take 100 person months. Think about that. That's a lot of time not on a golf course, right? Through low code, they estimated that they could cut that down, and they were able to cut it down to 5 person months. So dramatic reduction. One of my favorite stories is this UK insurance portal, UK insurance agent portal. And when we talked to them, they were trying to figure out, how do we build an application very quickly to test out an idea for a new product, new service we want to offer? And so what they were able to do with their low-code platform is deliver a prototype application that they were able to test with the agents in 10 days. Very quick, very rapid. And then another one that I really enjoyed and makes the case for low code was around a Spanish insurance company, where what they were able to do, they used their low code platform as their only platform for building new applications. So enterprise-wide, they're only built no Java, no .NET. Every application is built on this platform. And what they were able to find, some of the feedback they gave us, is typical solutions that they roll out in the past could take 12 to 16 months. Today, they're saying they roll these out in about 13 weeks, very rapidly, right? And so these platforms are able to deliver. I walked away, I was a skeptic at first, like, maybe let's see what happens, let's see what we hear. But I walked away from this a believer in the sense that we heard enough stories, we heard enough examples of the applications being used to deliver these types of results. And just to give you an example for one of the Appian clients this here that I think you should talk to, or you'll have a chance to hear after my presentation, after the break, is Sprint. And it's interesting, last year at the same event, I was in a session and Sprint was sharing some details on how they're using Appian. And what I love, what caught my attention, is they said, well, we use Appian to do this duct tape and bale wire type solutions. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, what does that mean? And what they were saying is, we use Appian to build solutions to quickly experiment with new ideas. And so we interviewed them. That conversation intrigued me, so we interviewed them to learn more about how they're using Appian. And one of the examples that they shared with us was how they used the Appian platform, their low-code platform, to build a test app to test out an idea around the direct-to-you service, which is where a Sprint representative comes to your home, delivers your phone to you, transfers all of your data, and trains you on how to use the new phone. So instead of you sitting in the store waiting for all of this, you can use the service where they'll send someone out to you. And they were able to test this out very rapidly. That's one of the things that I love about this interview was they were able to build the app out very quickly, very short period of time, weeks, and then deploy this to one market, test out the idea, and then once they proved it out, they were able to scale out massively, right? So it's not just let's build a prototype and throw it away. Let's actually build something that's reusable, build it quickly, to validate new service, new capability, right? Now, as we went on this journey and subsequent, after we did the first round of research, we got a lot of pushback, right? That's one of the fun things about being an analyst is you get this pushback and you kind of say, okay, well, let's hear it, right? Let's see if there's truth to it or not. And what we walked away with after the first round of research was we were able to see that there were 3 myths that we needed to, or at least 3 common things that we heard that we needed to validate. Like, is this true? Is it not true? And we started focusing on these 3 myths, as we call them, because the next research really dug into these. And so one of the first things that we saw is that when we talked to people about low-code, or when companies were asking us about these platforms, first thing is people were like, this is for citizen developers only, as Matt was talking about, right? It's only for citizen developers, not for professional developers. We also heard that low-code, is it designed just to eliminate all coding, right? We get rid of everything, right? Low-code platforms eliminate the need for any programming, right? We also heard low-code platforms are good for small-scale apps only, right? So this is something we continue to hear. Customers saying, well, hey, maybe I can get this platform, I can deploy it, but maybe I build some very simple apps on this, and then, very straightforward. When we look at this and went back through the research and the subsequent round of research, what we found was that low-code targeted a range of developers. But the primary developers that we spoke with were professional developers, process developers, rapid application developers, and even in some cases, coders. So traditional coders using these platforms to build applications quickly, test out new ideas, and in some cases, continue building. And then we saw citizen developers also using these platforms. But the core using low code was not citizen developers building very simple apps. These were hardcore developers that wanted a faster way to build. Did they build everything in low code? No, right? But what they were able to do is look at the application requests coming into them and then build based on that, right? We use low code in some cases. In other cases, we build strategic apps or other apps in a different platform or through code. What we also wanted to understand is where do you need to code typically? Going back to this perspective that low code eliminates all code. We didn't call it no code. These are some of the places where we saw teams need to still do coding, right? Integrate with external databases, integrate with packaged applications, going back to this data issue, to complete the user experience, create reports and dashboards. So there is still this need to code, but again, to 10 to 15%, it doesn't eliminate all code. Also, what we see here, again, closing out, is we see this as a growing market, right? I think it's important. Sometimes you'll hear industry analysts say, okay, we're going to focus on this, and then it's a hot buzzword, and then the analyst moves on or the market moves on. And we believe the slide that was shown at the beginning, that 500,000 developer gap, is going to continue and persist. And we believe that companies will continue or will increase their investments in these platforms to be able to, as Matt was saying, get rid of the crank, right? How do we get rid of the crank? And so we see this trend going up. So in today's terms, if we look at 2016, about a $2.5 billion market. As we progress through, we're projecting this will grow to a $10 to $15 billion market over the next 4 or 5 years. And that's substantial. That's a big increase. And so going back to this, the picture that I painted at the beginning of this, the clouds forming. How many of you live in DC? How many people live in DC? I got a stat for you. We're on day 15 of rain, right? This is a record, I think. 15 days, every day since past 15 days, it's rained, right? So what we're talking about here with this opportunity for BPM to shift to low code, to shift to this way of delivering applications, the platforms, is getting the sun to come back out, right? And so I think the rain is supposed to go away on Saturday. I think for people that live here in DC, I think the rain goes away on Saturday and sun comes back out. That's what we're really talking about here, is getting the sun to come back out for BPM and using low code in this way to bring more people into the conversation around process change and being able to drive transformation from a digital perspective. And with that, I want to thank you. Thank you.
I know Forrester did a formal wave report
Yeah.
around low-code vendors. So just wanted to share with the audience what you found in terms of capabilities that Appian stood out for, and what you recommend for our community to take advantage of this low-code approach.
Yeah, I definitely recommend first, whether you're a Forrester client or not, go to our website, take a look at this wave. We have a lot of research around low-code. I think we have about 8 or 9 reports just on this topic. When we looked at low-code and the wave, there were 14 different vendors that we evaluated. The vendors that did well, like Appian, one of the things that we found was that those vendors don't just provide only drag and drop and declarative tooling, right? And the key there, I went into this wave with the mindset that the vendors that will win the wave are the vendors that all you do is drag and drop and you don't have to worry about coding anywhere, right? What I found is the vendors that offered those types of solutions didn't give you the ability to extend the platform. You were really locked in, right? So that example, Appian does this, a few other vendors do a really good job of saying, we give you the ability to do drag and drop, we give you all of the declarative tooling, but we also give you a way to extend it through code. So don't think of, when we say low code, we're not saying code is bad, we're saying use code where it makes sense. So I think that was a big piece, is this balance between being able to code and being able to eliminate code. Yeah.
Okay, great. And final question, I think it requires mindset change in the leadership team and in the management team around a low-code approach. What lessons can you share about that?
The secret to this, I think, is in the conversation that I had with Sprint, the interview I did with Sprint, which is developing an experimental mindset, right? I think that's a big difference, is when we're starting to build new digital services using these platforms to drive speed, it's about experimenting. And so companies that do well, like Sprint's example, they actually have a methodology around experimentation, doing digital experiments, using design thinking. And so the mind shift change is to get away from, this sounds bad, I might have to change my, my Twitter handle to passion for low code or something instead of passion for process. But the key is not focusing or obsessing over the process model. I think that's the real key, is how do we focus on the engagement and then design the process around that customer experience or the engagement. I think that's the big mindset shift.
Great. Thanks a lot, Clay.
Thank you, Samir.